What happens when a beloved actor sits down for what should be a simple morning chat only to face the most shocking display of unprofessional behavior ever caught on live television? In just 37 seconds, one comment from the host would expose her true character and leave millions of viewers absolutely stunned. Gary Oldman walked into the bride's studio that morning with a warm smile, ready to discuss his latest film project. The legendary actor, known for his incredible range and dedication to his craft, had been looking forward to this interview. He'd always enjoyed chatting with fans about his work, and morning television usually provided that perfect relaxed atmosphere. "Good morning, Gary," Lorraine Kelly called out as he settled into the plush chair across from her. "Lovely to have you here with us today." "Thank you for having me, Lorraine." "Always a pleasure," Gary replied genuinely, adjusting his position and preparing for what he assumed would be a friendly conversation about his career. But something felt different today. There was a sharpness in Lorraine's voice, an edge that Gary couldn't quite place. The studio light seemed harsher than usual, and the atmosphere felt strangely tense. "So, Gary," Lorraine began, shuffling her notes with an unusual abruptness, "let's talk about your new film. Though I have to say I'm not entirely sure why you chose this particular project." Gary raised an eyebrow, slightly surprised by the directness of her opening. "Well, the script was extraordinary. The character really spoke to me, and working with this director has been a dream of mine for years." "Spoke to you?" Lorraine interrupted, her tone becoming noticeably sharper. "That's interesting because, frankly, Gary, I watched it last night, and I found it rather forgettable." The comment hung in the air like a thick fog. Gary maintained his composure, but viewers could see the slight confusion crossing his face. This wasn't the typical morning chat show banter he'd experienced countless times before. "I'm sorry to hear you didn't connect with it," Gary responded diplomatically, his voice steady despite the unexpected criticism. "Art is subjective, of course. Different stories resonate with different people." "Oh, please," Lorraine scoffed, leaning forward in her chair with an aggressive posture. "Don't give me that diplomatic actor nonsense. You know as well as I do when something isn't working." Gary's expression shifted slightly, his professional smile wavering for just a moment. He'd been in this business for decades and had faced tough questions before. But this felt different. This felt personal. "I'm not sure I understand what you're getting at, Lorraine," he said carefully, trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground. "I'm very proud of the work we did on this film." "Proud?" Lorraine's voice rose slightly, and several crew members exchanged worried glances behind the cameras. "Gary, let's be honest here. Your recent choices have been questionable at best. This film, your last 3 projects, actually, they've all been rather disappointing." The studio fell silent except for the quiet hum of the cameras. Gary's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he maintained his professionalism. "I appreciate your opinion, Lorraine, but I have to respectfully disagree. I choose projects based on the story, the character, and the creative team involved. Commercial success isn't always the primary factor." "Creative team?" Lorraine laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. "Gary, come on. We both know you're not 25 anymore. Maybe it's time to be more realistic about the roles you're taking." The comment landed like a physical blow. Gary's eyes flashed with something between hurt and anger, but he took a deep breath before responding. "I'm not sure what my age has to do with my ability to tell compelling stories," he said, his voice remaining remarkably controlled. "Experience tends to enhance an actor's craft, not diminish it." "Does it though?" Lorraine pressed on, seemingly oblivious to how uncomfortable everyone in the studio had become. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're just taking whatever roles come your way these days." Gary sat back in his chair, processing what was happening. This wasn't an interview anymore. This was something else entirely, and he was beginning to realize that he'd walked into some kind of ambush. "Lorraine," he said slowly, "I came here today to talk about a project I'm passionate about, to share that enthusiasm with your viewers. I'm not sure why this conversation has taken such a negative turn." "Negative?" Lorraine's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. "I'm just being honest, Gary. Isn't that what good journalism is about? Asking the hard questions." "There's a difference between tough questions and personal attacks," Gary replied, his patience beginning to wear thin. "And I'm starting to wonder which category this falls into." The camera operators continued filming, but the atmosphere in the studio had become electric with tension. Producers in the control room were frantically discussing whether to cut to commercial, but the train wreck happening before them was too compelling to stop. "Personal attacks?" Lorraine repeated, her voice dripping with false innocence. Gary, I think you might be being a bit sensitive here. I'm simply pointing out some observations about your recent career trajectory. Observations that seem designed to embarrass rather than inform, Gary countered, his diplomatic facade finally beginning to crack. I've been doing this job for over 3 decades, Lorraine. I know the difference between a professional interview and whatever this is. Lorraine's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath, but she quickly recovered, plastering on her signature smile. Well, I suppose we'll have to agree to disagree on that point, she said with fake cheerfulness. But let's talk about something else. Your personal life has been quite colorful over the years, hasn't it? Gary's entire demeanor changed. The gloves were officially off now, and everyone in the studio could feel it. This had crossed a line that should never be crossed in a professional setting. I think we should stick to discussing my work, Gary said firmly, his voice carrying a warning that anyone with sense would heed. But Lorraine Kelly, it seemed, had lost all sense. Oh, but Gary, Lorraine continued with that sickeningly sweet tone, completely ignoring his clear boundary. Surely your fans are interested in the whole person, not just the actor. And you've given them so much to talk about over the years, haven't you? Gary's hands gripped the arms of his chair slightly tighter, his knuckles beginning to show white. Lorraine, I came here as a professional courtesy to discuss my film. My personal life is not up for discussion. Not up for discussion? Lorraine's laugh was sharp and cutting. Gary, you're a public figure. Everything is up for discussion. That's the price of fame, isn't it? No, actually it isn't, Gary replied, his voice growing firmer. There's a difference between being a public figure and being public property. I maintain the right to privacy in my personal affairs. But Lorraine was like a dog with a bone now, and she had no intention of letting go. Her eyes gleamed with something that looked almost predatory as she leaned forward even more. Privacy. That's rich coming from someone who's had such, shall we say, dramatic relationships over the years. Tell me, Gary, do you think your personal choices affect how audiences perceive your characters? The question was loaded with implications designed to force Gary into defending himself against accusations that hadn't even been made explicitly. It was a masterclass in hostile interviewing tactics. I think audiences are intelligent enough to separate an actor from the roles they play, Gary answered diplomatically, but his jaw was clenched now. They don't need tabloid gossip to enjoy a film. Tabloid gossip. Lorraine's voice rose with false indignation. Gary, these aren't rumors we're talking about. These are well-documented events in your life. Your marriages, your difficulties. The word difficulties hung in the air like poison. Gary's eyes flashed dangerously and several crew members shifted uncomfortably. Everyone in the room could feel the tension reaching a breaking point. I think you need to be very careful about what you're implying, Lorraine, Gary said slowly, his voice low and controlled, but carrying an unmistakable warning. Implying? Lorraine seemed to be enjoying this now, feeding off the discomfort she was causing. I'm not implying anything, Gary. I'm stating facts. Your life has been quite tumultuous, hasn't it? All those relationships, all that drama. It makes one wonder about your judgment. That was it. The line had been crossed, and there was no going back. Gary's professional mask finally slipped completely, revealing the righteous anger beneath. My judgment. Gary's voice was quiet now, but it carried more power than any shout could have. You want to talk about judgment, Lorraine? Let's talk about the judgment of a talk show host who thinks it's appropriate to ambush a guest with personal attacks and insinuations. Lorraine's smile faltered for just a moment, but she pressed on recklessly. I'm just asking questions, Gary. If you can't handle a few. Questions. Gary interrupted, his composure finally cracking. These aren't questions, Lorraine. This is character assassination disguised as journalism. And frankly, I'm appalled that a broadcaster of your supposed reputation would stoop to this level. The control room was in chaos now. Producers were frantically trying to decide whether to cut the feed, but the compelling nature of what was unfolding kept the cameras rolling. This was television history in the making, and everyone knew it. Character assassination. Lorraine's voice was shrill now, her own mask beginning to slip. Gary, I think you're being rather dramatic. This is just a conversation. A conversation? Gary stood up slowly, his tall frame imposing in the bright studio lights. Lorraine, if this is your idea of a conversation, then I'd hate to see what you consider an interrogation. Sit down, Gary, Lorraine commanded, her tone suddenly authoritative and condescending. We're not finished here. Oh, but we are, Gary replied calmly, but his voice carried an edge of steel. We're very much finished. I won't sit here and be subjected to this kind of treatment. Lorraine's face flushed red, and for the first time, viewers could see her true nature emerging. The polished television personality was falling away, revealing something much uglier underneath. You can't just walk out of an interview, Gary, she said, her voice rising. That's not how this works. I have a job to do here. Your job is supposed to be interviewing people about their work, not launching personal attacks, Gary shot back. And my job certainly isn't to sit here and take abuse from someone who's clearly forgotten what professional journalism looks like. Abuse? Lorraine's voice was practically a shriek now. Gary, you're being ridiculous. I'm asking perfectly legitimate questions. Legitimate? Gary's laugh was bitter. Lorraine, there's nothing legitimate about what you've been doing here today. You've been hostile, unprofessional, and frankly cruel. The word cruel seemed to hit Lorraine like a physical blow. Her face contorted with anger, and all pretense of professionalism evaporated completely. How dare you? She hissed, rising from her own chair. Now, how dare you come onto my show and call me cruel? I've been in this business for years, Gary. I know how to do my job. Do you? Gary asked quietly, his calm a stark contrast to her obvious agitation. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've forgotten everything about basic human decency, let alone professional broadcasting standards. The studio fell silent except for the sound of Lorraine's heavy breathing. Camera operators continued filming, unsure whether they should stop. The tension was so thick it was almost suffocating. You think you're so superior, don't you? Lorraine spat. All pretense of civility gone now. You come in here with your fancy actor attitude, thinking you're above answering tough questions. There's a difference between tough questions and personal attacks, Lorraine, Gary replied evenly. And what you've been doing today crosses every line of professional conduct I can think of. Professional conduct? Lorraine's voice was venomous now. Don't lecture me about professional conduct, Gary. At least I show up to work sober. The comment landed like a bomb in the studio. Crew members gasped audibly. Producers in the control room were shouting, and Gary Oldman stood perfectly still, staring at Lorraine Kelly with a mixture of shock and disgust. Excuse me. Gary's voice was deadly quiet now. Lorraine seemed to realize she'd gone too far, but it was far too late to take back what she'd said. The damage was done, and the whole world had heard it. The silence that followed was deafening. Gary's face went through a series of emotions. Shock, hurt, and then a cold, controlled fury that was more frightening than any explosion of anger could have been. Did you just? Gary began, his voice barely above a whisper. Did you just make a reference to my personal struggles with addiction on live television? Lorraine's face had gone pale, finally realizing the magnitude of what she'd just done. But instead of apologizing, instead of showing any shred of human decency, she doubled down. I simply said what everyone already knows, she replied, though her voice was shaking now. If you can't handle the truth. The truth? Gary's voice cut through her words like a blade. The truth is that I've been sober for over 15 years, Lorraine. The truth is that I've worked incredibly hard to overcome personal challenges and build a successful career. The truth is that you just made the most disgusting, unprofessional comment I've ever heard on television. Every person in that studio knew they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't just a heated exchange anymore. This was a complete breakdown of everything that television interviews were supposed to represent. Gary, Lorraine started, but he held up his hand. No, he said firmly. You've said quite enough. In fact, you've revealed exactly who you are, and I think your viewers deserve to know what kind of person they've been welcoming into their homes every morning. Gary turned to face the camera directly, speaking to the audience with a dignity that stood in stark contrast to Lorraine's behavior. Ladies and gentlemen, he said calmly, I came here today to talk about a film I'm proud of, to share some positive thoughts about creativity and storytelling. Instead, I've been subjected to personal attacks and now apparently mockery of addiction recovery. Gary, that's not what Lorraine tried to interrupt. Please don't, Gary said without even looking at her. You've done enough damage for one morning. He turned back to the camera, his voice steady and measured. Recovery from addiction is something millions of people struggle with every day. It's not a punchline. It's not ammunition for a talk show host who's run out of legitimate questions. It's a serious personal journey that deserves respect, not ridicule. The power of his words was undeniable. Even the hardened television crew were moved by his dignity in the face of such unprovoked cruelty. You can't just give a speech to the camera, Lorraine protested weakly. Her authority completely evaporated. "This is my show." Gary finally turned back to her, and his expression was one of such profound disappointment that it was almost worse than anger. "Your show," he repeated quietly. "Lorraine, this isn't a show anymore. This is a disgrace. And you've turned what should have been a simple, pleasant conversation into something that will probably be remembered as one of the lowest moments in British television history." "That's ridiculous," Lorraine snapped, but her voice lacked conviction. "You're being overly dramatic." "Am I?" Gary asked. "Lorraine, in the space of 20 minutes, you've attacked my career choices, questioned my judgment, invaded my privacy, and then made jokes about my recovery from addiction. If that's not dramatic enough for you, I'm not sure what would be." The studio was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. "I think," Gary continued, "that your viewers deserve better than this. They deserve a host who treats guests with basic human respect. They deserve someone who understands the difference between journalism and bullying." "Bullying?" Lorraine's voice cracked. "Gary, I am not a bully." "Then what do you call what just happened here?" Gary asked quietly. "What do you call attacking someone's personal life, their recovery, their career? What do you call using someone's vulnerability as a weapon?" Lorraine had no answer. For the first time in the entire exchange, she was completely speechless. Gary picked up his jacket from the back of his chair and looked directly at her one final time. "I hope," he said softly, "that when you watch this back, you'll see what everyone else has seen today. I hope you'll understand why I can't stay here any longer." "You can't just leave," Lorraine said desperately, her composure completely shattered. "We have more to discuss." "No, Lorraine," Gary replied with finality. "We really don't. You've made it clear that you're not interested in discussing my work or anything else constructive, and I'm not interested in being your punching bag." He turned toward the exit, then paused and looked back at the camera one more time. "To anyone watching who might be struggling with addiction or any other personal challenge," he said, his voice warm and sincere, "please know that recovery is possible, that you deserve respect and support, and that your struggles don't define your worth as a human being." With that, Gary Oldman walked off the set, leaving behind a stunned silence and a television host whose true character had been exposed for all to see. Lorraine remained standing behind her desk, her face a mixture of shock, anger, and what might have been the first glimmer of shame. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of her humiliation. "Well," she finally managed to say, her voice shaky, "I suppose we'll have to take an early break." But the damage was done in 37 seconds. One cruel comment had destroyed her credibility and revealed the ugly truth about who she really was. Gary Oldman had walked away with his dignity intact, while Lorraine Kelly was left to face the consequences of her appalling behavior. The interview that was supposed to be a routine chat about a new film had instead become a masterclass in how quickly a career can be damaged by cruelty, unprofessionalism, and the complete abandonment of basic human decency. And every single devastating second had been captured on live television for the world to see.